Good morning, and welcome to day 2 of MedCity Invest Precision Medicine. I'm Stephanie Baum, Director of Special Projects with MedCity News. Before we get started with our Health IT track of our Pitch Perfect competition, I'd like to give you a little bit of background about MedCity News. We were founded in late 2008 to cover innovation in life sciences and healthcare. We cover biopharma, digital health, medical devices, diagnostics, as well as hospitals and payers in the context of the industry's overall transformation. We host a number of conferences each year. In addition to Invest Precision Medicine, we also have conferences focusing on investment, population health, digital health, and patient engagement. We have a number of programs. We accept outside content through a MedCity Influencers program. We also have a membership-based program geared for startups called MedCitizens, which offers editorial and event benefits. If you have any questions about that, you could reach me at sbaum@medcitynews.com. We also have a podcast program called MedCity Pivot. You can listen to all our episodes on our website. And if you have any questions about MedCity Pivot, you can contact our editor-in-chief, Arundhati Parmar, at aparmar@medcitynews.com. We also have, for this, we've recently launched a program called MedCity News Spotlight. It's part of our conferences. It will be a regular feature of our conferences and to augment panel discussions and presentations. We'll use video to tell the story of important companies, executives, and healthcare initiatives. Our first edition of Spotlight features Cancer IQ and how they're advancing precision medicine. And you can look it up. You can check them out on our website. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Independence Blue Cross, which is the largest health insurance organization in Southeast Pennsylvania and a longtime sponsor of MedCity events. I'd also like to thank JPOD at the University of Pennsylvania. I'd also like to thank our partners, the University City Science Center, MHIN, Health Wildcatters, Startup Health, and Argo Pond Consulting. Before we get started, we just want to go over some of the contest ground rules. The Health IT track features 5 startups. Each startup will have 10 minutes, 4 minutes for their pitch, and 6 minutes for a Q&A with judges. And the time will be strictly enforced, so please be respectful of each other's time. And just for the judges, just please try to avoid asking questions sort of when you have only a few seconds left. At the end of the presentations, we will be doing an online poll to determine an audience favorite. The winners will be announced on Monday on medcitynews.com, and there will be a winner from each of the tracks we're doing, Health IT and Life Sciences. And now I'd like you to meet our judges, Sid Sridhar and Aaron Starasta. Sid is a corporate development associate at Centene Corporation, a diversified multi-regional healthcare enterprise that provides a portfolio of services to government-sponsored and commercial healthcare programs focusing on the underinsured and uninsured individuals. He joined the group in March 2016, and he is currently based in St. Louis. Sid is responsible for global M&A, digital health investments, joint ventures, and divestitures within Centene's core markets and products that serve 1 in 15 Americans and 600,000 lives internationally. Prior to joining corporate development, Sid spent 2 years working in internal audit at Centene, and responsibilities included operational audits, market and enterprise risk assessments, and Sarbanes-Oxley control testing. He joined the company as a summer intern after graduating from the University of Missouri, Columbia, with a BS in finance. Aaron Strasta has been involved in both healthcare-related and venture capital-related endeavors since 1992. Over the 25 years, Dr. Strasta has consulted and run over 25 accelerators on behalf of universities, nonprofit research entities, and multiple billion-dollar-plus corporations. Among them, the University City Science Center's Digital Health Accelerator, and most recently, the Launch Lane Accelerator, which have collectively supported 27 companies that have gone on to raise more than $100 million in follow-on funding and raise $50 million in revenue. Dr. Strasta completed his bachelor's degree at McGill University and received advanced degrees in psychology and neuroscience from Temple University. We have 5 companies presenting during Pitch Perfect. They include Destroke, DrugViu, Backdrop Health, Parallel Profile, and Siris Medicine. And now, first up is Destroke. Destroke is a digital health company developing a mobile app for automated clinical stroke detection. This app uses speech, face, and motion recognition technologies to detect the signs of stroke based on the validated NIH stroke scale, and can report these findings to patients, loved ones, telestroke providers, healthcare providers, and EMS. This app is intended, this app is intended to be used by those at risk for stroke, such as patients who have had a stroke or those with cardiovascular risk factors, as well as healthcare providers who may not have expertise in stroke detection. Pilot studies testing the validity and efficacy of the Destroke app, are underway at Weill Cornell Medical New York Presbyterian Hospital and about to begin at Burke Neurological Institute in Westchester, New York. The Destroke platform empowers patients with stroke to take control of their stroke care and to improve detection and monitoring of stroke to improve brain health. Presenting for Destroke is Dr. Evan Noch, co-founder and CEO.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thanks for inviting us to speak here today. You're having dinner alone at home when you suddenly notice that the water you're drinking is dripping out of the right side of your mouth. You think, maybe I was just clumsy with the glass. But then a few moments later, you notice that you're having trouble holding the fork in your right hand. You think, could I be having a stroke? Is this what a stroke feels like? What do you do? What should you do? What if you had the reliability of a stroke detection app to tell you if you were having a stroke? And if you've already had a stroke, what if you had the comfort of having a neurologist with you at home to tell you if you should go back to the hospital? My name is Evan Noch, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Destroke. Stroke is the #1 cause of severe disability in the US, and there are 800,000 strokes per year, leading to an annual expenditure of $102 billion. In stroke, we know that for every 2 hours delay in getting to the hospital, that impairs 2 quality years of life, and 2 million neurons die per minute. But only 20 to 25% of patients get help within 3 hours, leading to the conclusion that patients do not make it to the hospital soon enough to get treatment. Our solution, Destroke, a mobile stroke detection app based on the NIH stroke scale that uses automated voice recognition, object recognition, speech analysis, and motion recognition with patent-pending algorithms to detect the signs of stroke. In the app, patients enter their demographic information and then answer the same questions that we ask them in the ER, such as smile and show their teeth, name objects, read sentences, raise the arms and legs, and they would get score reports like this one, which might show some minor abnormalities on the left, or on the right with major abnormalities. These results would get transmitted to their emergency contact physician, telestroke provider, or EMS already on the way. Our customers are people with a history of stroke, as 1 out of 4 have had a prior stroke, as well as those with cardiovascular risk factors, elderly, and ambulances and nursing homes. For our target market, our research shows that there's about a $10,000 difference between each CMI level associated with stroke severity. In this model, if there are 800,000 strokes in the US per year, we could potentially save about $10,000 for each decrease in stroke severity associated with getting to the hospital sooner. Our model is a B to B to C model, where we sell this app to hospitals and insurance companies, which upon FDA clearance as a Class 2 medical device could be a reimbursable expense with existing CPT codes and a licensed subscription to patients. Our main competitors focus on relatively cumbersome physical clot detection, not clinical stroke detection. Our app is the only clinical stroke detection, smartphone-based, easy-to-use app with IP in the form of embedded algorithms within the iOS platform that performs a comprehensive stroke examination. For our financials, we've achieved $35,000 in self-funding, have a trademark in use, and are patent pending, and are seeking $1 million in seed funding to fund our early phase pilot studies in anticipation of Series A funding to fund our FDA regulatory process that will lead to pre-tax income in 2023 of $3.8 million. Our team is composed of myself, a board-certified neurologist, my co-founder, Tomer Yaron, as well as Dan Pham, our head of software development, and Dr. Denise Winokur, our advisor. We have pilot studies at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medicine, which is an inpatient-based study looking at stroke detection, and an outpatient-based stroke monitoring study at Burke Neurological Institute. Our early pilot study results show that of our surveyed stroke patients, 100% use their mobile phones frequently throughout the day, 70% use digital health apps, and 80% of our patients would pay for a stroke detection app. In summary, Destroke is the first and only mobile app to detect stroke based on the NIH stroke scale, allowing communication with healthcare providers and telemedicine networks, reducing time to get to the hospital to improve stroke outcomes and save money. It's scary being home all alone, especially in this time of social isolation. If you're home alone and you're having trouble holding the fork in your right hand, you shouldn't have to worry about what to do. All you have to do is take out the Destroke app, and Destroke can help detect that stroke and get you or your loved ones the help that you need. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Evan. Now over to the judges.
I guess I will kick it off. But thank you for the presentation. It's great to hear your story and background. And so, I guess really you guys are in kind of the early stages right now. And so looks like you've completed some clinical trials. And so just without getting maybe into too much detail, how has that been going, and kind of what positive momentum have you been seeing from that, or any learning experiences that you may have gained?
Yeah, so we are trying to validate various market segments right now, which is why we have the inpatient-based study at Cornell and the outpatient-based study. So that will validate both the stroke detection that can be used in the hospital. So when patients with in-hospital strokes have strokes, they can be detected, and also to validate the algorithms. And the outpatient-based study is meant to create validation of patients using this at home after stroke admissions. So when patients get into the hospital with a stroke and they leave, they get stroke education. And that currently consists of the bedside provider saying, hey, Mrs. Smith, you just had a stroke. If you have a headache or you have weakness on one side or numbness, come back to the hospital. And of course, that's kind of in one ear, out the other for most patients who are being discharged with stroke. So what we're doing is validating this as a stroke education tool to be given to patients when they leave the hospital with a stroke diagnosis. So rather than the prior scenario, what we envision is that they would actually use this app in the hospital. The bedside provider would show them how to use the app. And then when they go home, they can use it to monitor their stroke recovery. And also if they have recurrent signs of stroke, which happens in about 25% of patients in 12 weeks, then they can do that and come back to the hospital. So we're in the midst of both of those studies right now. We also have an ER-based study, which is going to be a provider-based study at Northwell Health, where the providers in the ER will use this app for patients because a lot of practitioners don't know how to do the stroke scale. And so in those hospitals, this can supplement the care that they already receive. So once we validate these markets, then that will provide a really good foundation for the FDA regulatory process and a randomized studies where we compare the efficacy of this app to no app in patients who've had a stroke or those with cardiovascular risk factors.
So I'm going to jump in here and apologize if I'm direct, but I think I heard you say that the people who would use this app would be people who had had strokes before. True?
That would be the primary.
Never had strokes before.
People who have had strokes before.
Correct. So what's the market segment of that in the United States?
Yeah, so there are 750,000 new strokes per year, and there are 3.8 million people living who've had a prior stroke. So altogether, that's over 4 million people right now who've currently had a stroke.
So I always feel like people, so my father had a stroke this last year, and he's doing well, but thank you. And the point though, and actually our CEO of our company had a major stroke as well in the last year. And so, both of them now have an army of people around them that are sensitive to strokes, and they themselves are sensitive to strokes, or worried about these sorts of things. So they're over vigilant about this sort of stuff. So I feel like an app for somebody who's had a stroke is almost too late in some respects because they're already paying attention to this sort of thing. And so I'm a little lost on the process here.
So that's a really good insight, but that, I guess, fortunately or unfortunately, is the vast minority of cases. So most people with stroke are not only not vigilant about the stroke, but many stroke patients have strokes where they themselves are not aware of the symptoms, which is called anosognosia. So any type of stroke in the right hemisphere, the patient will never be aware of, regardless of how many strokes they've had. And so that's a big missed opportunity for those patients to actually recognize a stroke, and their loved ones
but if I'm not recognizing that I'm having a stroke, why would I take out an app to check if I'm having a stroke?
It can be used by the loved ones, right? So if your spouse is the one who recognized the first stroke, but maybe they weren't exactly sure, then they can help detect that stroke with the app that they have on their own phone or the patient's own phone. The other issue
so then it's not the user themselves that's using it. It's got to be a loved one.
Yeah, the patients
so of the 750,000 people that are out there, what percentage have a loved one that is capable of doing that? I think your market segment goes down some.
So that might go down. It might go down a little bit, I would say, but most of the patients in our studies so far have had someone who watches them, whether it's their grandchild, their son, their spouse. And most of the time, what we actually find is that if a patient is alone at home after stroke, what the family members want is they want to monitor them over time. So what we envision is that, let's say your grandmom lives out in California and I'm in New York, that grandmom actually uses the stroke app twice a day after their stroke, so that actually they can keep track of it and send those results to their contact twice a day so that they can check on them. Because one thing we hear often is that, especially in COVID, you don't have a lot of family members around. And so there's a lot of concern that we actually might not be checking on loved ones efficiently.
Sure. I have other questions, but Sid, go ahead, please.
No, that was actually you. It took a lot of mine about the users and kind of who would be the primary,
So then let me ask the payer question. You mentioned that payers would be the ones who pay for this. Why? Yeah. What's their incentive to do so?
Yeah, so our research shows that if we can reduce the time to get to the hospital with stroke, which of course directly improves stroke outcomes, we know that from many cross-sectional studies, that we can actually reduce the severity of the stroke and the cost of the stroke admission. So in a DRG-based system, if a hospital has a patient that's admitted for 3 days for a minor stroke versus 7 days because of complications, let's say from infections or from a slightly worse stroke that would have been treated by getting to the hospital sooner, we can potentially improve the cost of that. So the hospital can save money and length of stay. They can also save money in the pain point of readmission or a bounce back, which often happens if a patient, let's say, comes back to the hospital with symptoms that are not consistent with stroke, they would have detected with the app. And then from the insurance company perspective, if we can save money on the CMI, then the insurance company could save money by actually having patients come into the hospital and have lower severity of care and less healthcare utilization. So both are really incentivized to give the app to stroke patients for general health, general brain health, and actually prevention of really severe strokes. The same thing happens when insurance companies
Evan, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for presenting. That's all the time we have. Next up is, and thank you for presenting. Next up is DrugViu. Sorry, just bear with me. DrugViu is a population health platform that is expanding the data set in health and medication outcomes for non-white populations. Developer of a population health platform intended to empower communities of color to use their data to improve health outcomes. The company's platform collects authenticated user-generated health profiles from people of color, enabling researchers to advance research and drug development for autoimmune diseases and users to find medications and the experiences of similar people, in turn, helping them to lead a healthier and happier life. Kwaku Owusu, co-founder and CEO, will present.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kwaku Owusu, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of DrugViu. And DrugViu is solving the persistent problem of underrepresentation in clinical research in a scalable, data-driven, and patient-focused way. Our platform simultaneously improves diversity in research and provides clinical-grade real-world data to biopharma companies. It is no secret that clinical research has a diversity problem. While 40% of the US citizens are a racial and ethnic minority, These populations represent less than 10% of clinical research participants. This has patient outcomes implications and reduces the available data on health experiences. We're solving this problem in a way that works both for the patient and for biopharmaceutical companies. And we're focused exclusively on autoimmune diseases. We have taken an organ by organ approach, which allows us to get a concentration of data in a specific area today and add other organs or diseases associated with that organ down the line. We are currently focused on rare and common autoimmune diseases in neurology, dermatology, and GI. These are areas of high unmet need for our patient demographics and high value indications for biopharma. The DrugViu platform allows patients to easily share medical records with researchers and participate in clinical trials. Here's how it works. Users give us permission to retrieve their medical records. From this, we get clinical grade data around their medications, their diagnosis, their lab work, and other relevant data points. We combine that with the patient's own self-reported outcomes. This creates a unique data asset where a symbiotic relationship exists between the EHR and the patient-reported outcome. The EHR validates the patient-reported outcomes, and the patient-reported outcome enriches the EHR. We take this data, de-identify the PHI, and add it to our database. We then apply machine intelligence to it, find trends and insights, and make that available to biopharmaceutical companies for their research purposes. We also use our platform to qualify, motivate, educate, and enroll that patient in the clinical trial. So that solves the problem upstream of that lack of diversity, and downstream, we increase the data set available to be much more representative. The DrugViu platform is patient-centric and provides value back to our users. Each drug viewer gets a secure portal where they can track their contributions to research in real time and enroll in the right clinical trials. Our value to researchers and biopharma spans R&D to post-market. We have enrolled over 5,500 autoimmune patients on our platform. Our current customers span biotech, academia, and life sciences. We also work out of Johnson & Johnson's Innovation Lab in New York. Customers pay DrugViu to use our platform to enroll patients into their clinical trials. In addition, biopharma will pay an annual subscription fee to access the insights from the DrugViu real-world evidence platform. We are a dedicated team on a mission to diversify research and advance treatments for autoimmune diseases. My co-founder Mel and I met when we founded our previous health tech startup. And through the network that we have built over the years, we have assembled a world-class advisory board with deep expertise in pharmacology, data science, and immunology. We are raising $2 million. We have a term sheet, we have a lead investor, and we have more than half of the round filled. So I want to thank you very much and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Kwaku. Sid, why don't you start? You just
sorry about that. Appreciate the presentation. So a lot of the initial kind of acquisition of people to get onto the platform is getting their consent, right, to be able to obtain their medical records. So how do you anticipate scaling this business if you have to really get consent from each individual person in order to scale?
Oh, for sure. That's a really good question. So we have three ways that we are recruiting people on our platform. We have an offline, direct-to-consumer online, and in partnerships with health systems approach. So offline, we work with patient advocates, patient registries. We work with churches and community centers and things of that nature. We also have this thing called our diverse clinician network, and it's composed of doctors that believe research should be more representative, and they're referring people to the DrugViu platform. So everything that we've learned offline, we've applied online. So we are now doing direct-to-consumer online targeting, where we can reach consumers via Facebook and other methods to get them on our platform. And then lastly, we want to work with health systems themselves to scale this and get data at scale to get people on our platform. So that's how we are growing our user acquisition.
So can I ask a follow-up, Sid, or you got it? Sid, can I ask a
question? Sorry, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, yep. So Kwaku, so sort of a two-part thought. One, with the 5,500 or so people, 5,800 people that you've recruited so far, are these a supplement to clinical trials? So if a clinical trial is doing 100,000 patient, blah, 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 whatever, 10,000 patient, blah, 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 are they coming to you to find 20% of people that they can add to that trial to round out the diversity? Are they using your team? Like, are they just doing trials with your group? Like, how do they utilize that service is the first question I have.
Okay, yeah, it depends, right? So on the clinical trial side, we will get a contract from a biopharma or research organization stating that we need to get X number of people for our study. And then we'll use our platform because we have the patient's EHR and we have their self-reported outcomes. We can match the patient much better than other ways that they recruit. And not only do we match, we qualify the patient and we use our platform to educate and enroll that patient to that clinical trial. So it could be that it's a trial where they want just our user base, or one where we add to the existing clinical trial and we are helping diversify that particular study.
So I know that entities, some of the larger university hospitals and things like that have systems that aggregate all of the patient demographic information in a non-identifiable sort of way that would allow them, if they want to do a clinical trial, I'll pick Penn just for the sake of argument, University of Pennsylvania. So they say, we're looking for these sorts of things, and it spits out these numbers, and they can say, okay, we'll send an invite to these numbers because they fit the demographics that they're looking for. Are they people that would not use your system? Is this, how does this differ from, or how is this an advantage over that sort of system?
Oh, for sure. So we also work with health systems, right? If you look at the numbers, you will see that even with all the work that is being done at the university or the health system level, it's still appalling how many diverse people they get into their studies.
Sure.
Right. So what we do is we spend a lot of time educating the patient. We have the cultural competence, right? The whole approach of we need to get
more. Let me interrupt you there, because that's actually my third question that you can answer at the same time, which is oftentimes the issue with a lot of these clinical trials is not identifying minority subjects. The problem is that there's a lot of mistrust by those subjects for entering the trials. I mean, COVID's a great example. The Black community doesn't want to take it. They had to, the government had to go to extreme measures to even convince people it was safe for the Black community because they feel like this stuff hasn't been done in that community. So why should they take this vaccine, right? So in entering a clinical trial, as you said, the cultural competence, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that, because that's a big issue.
Okay, I'll talk about the cultural competence, but I'll talk about it in two ways, right?
Yeah.
The overall, we need to get more Black people or more Hispanic people into clinical trial. That message doesn't make any sense, right? In the disease that we're looking at, where a patient has, say, Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, and you're spending 20 hours in a bathroom, the last thing that they care about is diversifying clinical trials, right?
Sure.
The messaging is designed to benefit pharma or the site and not necessarily the patient. So we have taken the approach that clinical research is a care option. And here's why. When your doctor and her family members get these types of diseases, they tend to over-index in clinical trials because they look at it as a way to access potentially better medicines than what is on the market, number one. Number two, across the board, rich Black people join clinical trials. Rich Spanish people join clinical trials, right? Again, it's the same thing. You get control and you look at it as a way to access potentially better medicine. So it is in your self-interest to join this particular trial because it's a care option. You get better care. You see better doctors, right? So our messaging is much more patient-focused. And then we say, oh, by the way, because of who you are, the therapies that come out of it is going to work better for you your family, and your community, right? So we flip the message upside down. I think the traditional messaging is not designed to appeal to anyone. That's why they're not getting people across the board into clinical trials. That's the first thing. The second thing,
Michael, I would definitely make sure that you put that in future presentations, because that's a key element that I think is missing from what you talked about today. But keep going, sorry.
Oh, for sure. Thank you. And then the second one is on the cultural competence. Yes, there's a trust issue. Historically, medicine or clinical research has not been kind to Black and Native Americans, right? So I'm already approaching it from a place where I do not necessarily trust it. So we approach that head on, and we talk about why, we work with clinicians. We have our diverse clinician network for a reason, right? When they see that Black, Hispanic, Native American doctors are referring people to our platform, it helps them know that this is a platform that they can trust, and we do that in conjunction with some of the outreach efforts around, going to churches, going to community centers, really speaking to people where they are, not avoiding that there's been historical injustice in this space, and really understanding them and letting them know that it is in your best interest to join the study, especially in immunology where the diseases are pretty serious.
Okay, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Kwaku. And thank you for the judges. Okay, next up, we have Backdrop Health with Jerry Rudisin, the CEO. Backdrop Health Incorporated has created novel machine learning and AI software that maximizes the value of electronic medical records, enabling a new level of precision predictive medicine. Backdrop's solution radically extends the established concept of comorbidity, the occurrence of more than one condition in a patient at a time, such as obesity and diabetes. Given any body of medical records, our Backdrop Health software creates the backdrop for those records. A backdrop is a rich and comprehensive knowledge graph that captures the relationship of every clinical and demographic factor to every other factor. Querying the backdrop can bring massive benefits to clinical trials of new drugs, making it easier for pharmaceutical companies to bring new therapies to market, and to all aspects of personalized medicine, enabling healthcare providers to preemptively identify health issues and improve patient outcomes. Backdrop Health was launched in 2020 in Salt Lake City to commercialize this mature technology developed over 4 years at the University of Utah. Jerry Rudisin, the CEO, will present.
Good morning. I'm Jerry Rudisin, CEO of Backdrop Health. I think we've all seen the keen interest in applying modern machine learning and big data and AI techniques in all over the industries worldwide. That's particularly true in healthcare. And I think we've all seen there's really a mad scramble for companies to acquire and try to use and understand electronic health records, because there's a treasure trove of data there that could really be exploited if only we have the techniques to do that. So Backdrop is founded with the mission of improving human health and improving healthcare economics by creating a platform that really unlocks the full potential of electronic health records. We were launched in Salt Lake City this year, but the technology is quite mature, developed by Professor Mark Yandel in his lab at the U of U, which is a center of worldwide excellence in healthcare innovation. And we basically created unique big data techniques to really bring unprecedented precision to personalized medicine by really letting anybody with access to a large data set understand what they have and use it really effectively. So what do we do? As the summary mentioned, we build in this idea of comorbidity. That's a widely established idea in medicine. It simply means the coexistence of more than one condition in a patient at a time. And comorbidities have for generations been discovered and quantified using very well-established statistical techniques. And there's endless data tying these to certain outcomes, and they're used widely in medicine and in drug trials. But the field is really kind of primitive and ripe for disruption because of some big limitations. In particular, we've tended to ignore most of the available clinical data in computing comorbidities. And there's a need to stratify. Typically, when you're doing a drug trial or just trying to understand if something is related to another disease, you have to stratify or slice and dice the data to control for confounding variables like age or ethnicity or sex. So what we've done is provided, I think, a unique approach and a breakthrough approach that lets anybody with a medical data set see the maximum value of that data set. So basically, we start with radically extending the idea of comorbidity to use every factor, not just the diagnosed conditions, but every lab test, procedure, medication, and any genetic sequencing data if it's available. We then automatically find and quantify all comorbid factors in any given data set at scale. This literally can mean, let's say if you have 2 million patients, computing tens of trillions of probabilities. We do that in a very, very fast supercomputing way. We develop we discover the time sequence relationships between all these factors for causality. We identify automatically which clinical and demographic factors matter the most, which is helpful in studying any given outcome. We also model the influence of every patient's individual history, all their medical history and their individual demographic information on any outcome, and that removes the need to stratify. So we can actually show that with a data set of, say, 10,000 people, we can make predictions that are as valid as those with millions of people. By several orders of magnitude, we can improve or amplify the value of a medical data set. So we capture all this in software called CODE, the Comorbidity Discovery Engine, and it takes any body of medical records, runs it through the software, and creates the backdrop, hence the name of the company. The backdrop is a very comprehensive and rich knowledge graph that you can then query in any number of ways to study various outcomes. And the idea is that while traditional approaches to comorbidity discovery show part of the story, the backdrop does reveal everything. There are a bunch of queries that are built in, very, very powerful techniques for understanding any number of conditions. And the idea is that we can use this to vastly improve personalized medicine. But our first target market is really drug companies to markedly expedite and enhance clinical trials. There's a real issue in the expense, the risk, and the time of a trial. And we can make very, very real advantages to people who are putting together cohorts using real-world evidence studies and so forth. We're a software as a service offering. It's cloud-based, various pricing models, and we're seeking our initial funding to go from the university to commercial deployment of this technology and this solution. Thank you.
Over to why don't you start, Aaron?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jerry. Who is your customer? I'm having trouble figuring out exactly who's your customer. Is it an HIE? Is it? How do you cluster this amount of data that you need in order to do this? Because I'm unclear on that.
Right. So great question. So I have slides on that, but the basic idea is that if you look at a drug company doing a trial, they spend lots of money to license data from hospital systems, from research institutions, et cetera. As soon as they gather their own data. And so they would take our software and run their data sets. It could be millions of patients, it could be thousands of patients, and create the backdrop in their data set and use that to understand things like cohort assembly, to understand, put together maybe a synthetic control arm. That's an aspect of real-world evidence-based trials. But the key end user in the first market we go after is really frontline drug trial teams who are trying to figure out, what's the right inclusion and exclusion criteria for a trial. What maybe subtle combination of factors would say that somebody who isn't diagnosed today with a condition that's contraindicated in the trial should be eliminated from the trial. It's those kind of things. So it's the frontline people on drug trial teams and pharma companies in the US and around the world who are the first target market for us. In fact, we've seen examples. We've talked to people and they often spend, say, millions of dollars to acquire a data set that they want to use to put together a cohort, but they find only 3 or 4 or 5 usable patients because of the stratification problem, the need to really reduce the data to adjust for demographic factors like age and race and ethnicity and so forth. And we avoid that problem by the approach that we take in our novel solution. So we can really cut the cost of patient acquisition and really help them get much more value out of any data set that they acquire or develop on their own. Okay.
Jerry, this is Sid. Pleasure to meet you. So just a couple questions here. One is just limitation on data, right? Certain EMRs are more well known for limiting interoperability between systems and versions and things like that, and it can be a challenge to obtain the information, right? And just the variations in the version as well. And so, based on that, with some of the limitations you might face in the market, how might that affect your kind of end product or technology platform if it isn't able to get kind of the full robust data set that you need to kind of hit your results or to kind of get
A great question, Sid, and we've had experience there. So we developed this using access to the University of Utah's data set, but the company didn't license the raw data. We didn't want that. We are a software company that provides this solution. But the University of Utah system has their own enterprise data warehouse that's based on Epic Cerner, so we can take that easily. But basically, as long as we get the data in a SQL query or direct interface to Epic Cerner or an Excel spreadsheet for that matter, we can use it. As long as you know what the columns are, we can use that easily. And it can be a combination, not just of electronic medical records and clinical data, but things like genetic sequencing information, et cetera. We've done some trials, for example, one using a combination of extensive genetic sequencing for men with aggressively metastasizing prostate cancer, coupled with a bunch of clinical markers, and we're able to identify some subtle combinations of mutations that predict whether somebody will respond to a given drug or not. So we're very, very flexible at the size, at the nature of the data. And again, we're not licensing the data. We're not aggregating the data. We're not licensing the data. We're not a patient finding company. We're providing this uniquely powerful technology to let anybody with the data sets create this backdrop model and then use that to whatever things they're trying to study or whatever outcomes they're seeking to understand much more deeply.
So what's your primary revenue streams through this? How do you, what's the ROI on this?
Very good. So the primary revenue stream will be direct subscriptions. The idea is we'd sell this licenses to a given trial for, say, a year or for the lifetime of the trial for a given amount. We think we can make a material difference in cutting the cost per patient of acquisition and accelerating the completion time of a trial. We also think we can identify use cases. We actually have identified use cases where a trial will often stall or even fail because of seeming adverse effects. And with Backdrop, if you can really understand much more precisely all the factors that are behind a given patient's medical history, and you can maybe detect that, this patient had some adverse effects, but they were medically destined to do that. And if only you had the detailed understanding of what factors were part of their overall history, you could demonstrate that it wasn't really the drug, they were likely to have a stroke or whatever side effect anyway. So we think there's also a role in helping to rescue trials that are stalled or failed. But it's really direct income, a business-to-business model for pharmaceutical companies at first. And I think long-term, an even bigger market for us will be direct frontline healthcare, but we're focusing right now on pharma because healthcare IT spending is likely to be low in the next 18 months, partly because so many hospitals have taken a revenue hit because of shutting down discretionary procedures because of the COVID situation. And there's thousands of drug trials going on in the US at any one time alone, let alone worldwide. And I think that's a very, very, very big market for us.
One second.
Yeah, one last, just a suggestion. I wouldn't exploit patient data ever again.
Fair enough. Artfully use patient data, but
that's fine.
very good.
Yep.
Okay.
And we protect PHI in full in this whole thing, so nothing can ever be revealed.
You led with that, so I just thought, it sets people's minds in a certain direction.
Very good. Thanks, Aaron.
Yep.
I guess I'll ask one on trust. We talked about a lot of this on the last presentation, right? And you had a slide up about Google and their, desire to get medical records, right? And they actually partnered with Ascension and tried to do something there, and it actually caused a lot of backlash just in terms of people wondering, what are they going to do with my data? And
right, exactly.
How are they going to use it? And so, if I'm, giving my data to you, how do you establish that trust and
right.
make sure? Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, no, we have, there's deep protections against revealing any PHI that are built in, and Backdrop never sees or any retains any personal data. We create the model, the customer, whether it's a given drug company or a hospital system, they use the model if it's created. And actually, once the model is created, it's totally devoid of any identifiable information.
Wrap up, that would be great.
Thank you.
You can just wrap up.
And that was it. Thanks, Stephanie. Good questions, guys. Thank you so much.
Okay. On to our next presenter is Parallel Profile. Sorry.
Hi.
Parallel Profile is on a mission to save lives and billions in wasted healthcare spending by preventing adverse drug reactions. The team includes physicians, scientists, and professionals using today's genetic and pharmacy science to help people quickly and accurately match their prescription medications to their unique genetic profile and take them safely. Cathy, Cather, CEO, will present.
Hi, terrific to talk to you guys today.
Parallel Profile is a company that has intense interest from the US largest employers, that's our market, is helping major employers improve the quality and lower the cost of the care that they present to their employees. Why they care? They care because in addition to the 128,000 deaths that occur every year because of adverse drug reactions to approved drugs that safely pass trials, 2.7 million inpatients are admitted annually, and these are very expensive admits. These also result in extended length of stay and very expensive ICU days. In addition to the adverse effect events, there's really a lot of wasted money because of drug failures. 90% of doctors don't work, 90% of drugs, excuse me, that was wrong. 90% of drugs don't work effectively for 30% of the people taking them. Now, almost everyone has genetic variants that affect how they're going to respond to drugs. And in fact, 18% of people have already had an adverse reaction. And as you can see from these examples, and these are average, these are normal. We have people in our database that have 240 meds affected by their genetics. You look at these types of medications and the ineffective rates are very high, and this is well known. And so what happens is you have physicians trying something, seeing if it works for 30 to 45 days, 60 days, and then trying something else. And it's very discouraging. There are people who are on diabetes drugs that have been in chronic care management programs that employers spend a lot of money and resources on. And they actually, in the past, have labeled these people as non-compliant, when in fact, the drugs that they've been given and they are taking as prescribed just can't work for them because of their genetics. So what we do is we take standard genetic tests. These are pharmacogenetic tests. That's hard to pronounce, so we say PGX. So PGX tests, we take the reports, which generally are like 30 pages long, highly scientific, confusing language that physicians have told me that they'll give up after 45 minutes trying to figure out what they should do. We turn it into a summary for them that focuses only on what's actionable in the moment so that they can decide, okay, this is the problem, what are my alternatives, and do that in under 3 minutes altogether. Of course, it's all safe. We're really pleased that one of the good outcomes, at least from COVID, is the appreciation for telemedicine. So this is ordered online. The employers pay for it. It's a home test. It's genetic, so it's very private. It's separate website, separate login, everything, so that everyone's comfortable with the confidentiality. Although labs offer pharmacogenetic testing, none of them were built for employers. None of them were built for consumers. One of the things that people sometimes don't think of is there's a lot of over-the-counter drugs that have genetic impact. So they get an app on their phone, and they can, in literally seconds, type in the first 3 letters of the drug, click on the proper spelling, because who knows how to spell anything, and it'll tell them immediately if it's in their green zone, and if not, what alternatives are. We have a wonderful board of directors, physicians, scientists, who are really committed to this. All right. And so I look forward to taking your questions.
Okay, Sid, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you for the presentation. So, are there any limitations on to the therapeutic classes, or is there any drug that's out on the market can be tested against this?
There are definitely limitations. We only report on drugs that have been researched and have met both national using CPIC and international standards. We are also launching in the UK and the EU, so we're mindful of those as well. When we started, there were 240 drugs that were included, and now there's 1,058. So it grows every quarter when the standard for the findings to be actionable.
And I assume a lot of those drugs are pretty common in terms of what's prescribed out in the market.
Yes, what they did is they started with the most common, highly prescribed drugs and the ones that cause the most adverse effects. So for example, Mayo did a study with Medco, one of the largest PBMs, and they found that by doing the genetic test before prescribing warfarin, Coumadin, that they could reduce patient admits by 38% within the first 6 months. So they're looking at the risk as well as the commonality.
Great. And then one last question for me, and then Aaron, I'll kick it over to you. And then that's just, your supply chain. Do you guys have contracts with labs? Do you guys own your own labs, or can you describe that relationship?
Yeah, we have contracts with labs. We're on a platform that has 200 labs available to us. It's key to be able to pivot for large volume, because some of the employers who voted for us to be in the top 10 most innovative companies and who've committed to do trials with us are companies like Comcast, Boeing, Walmart. These are very, very large companies. And we also recognize that, any particular lab in any circumstance can have an issue. And so we have the ability to pivot very quickly to make sure that that doesn't happen.
So thank you for the presentation. So I want to ask a couple questions here, but one is, what's the sort of sweet spot size of a company that you would work with?
Well, frankly, anybody over 10,000 employees, but having spent 20 years in this marketplace and launching a series of companies for these guys, I know who the innovators are, and there's certain companies that try things out, then they report. They like to speak at all the employer conferences, and they speak about the new things that they've tried and discovered and what the results were. So you have the innovators, then you have the fast followers. Those are about 2,000 companies who see those conferences, see those endorsements, and then follow. And then you have the majority of the pack. So it's really not so much size as it is influencers, but it can be any size.
So a 100 person company could benefit from this, in your opinion?
Yeah, especially if they have a lot of employees over 40. It's all about who's on multiple medications. So for example, what we do is we get a data set from them, from their carrier, so we know what drugs they've paid for. And we look at people and identify people who are on ones that have been known to be dangerous at any age, ones that in combination with other ones. Frequently, there's a genetic profile, CYP2CD9, that affects a lot of different drugs. And so if you're on 3, if it's in your yellow zone, you can take one. But if you're on 3, now we're concerned. So we actually do predictive modeling. And we'll do that before they sign up so that they know what the value is to them.
Yeah, I could see this being more valuable to smaller companies than the larger ones in a lot of ways. And I feel like your market's lots larger if you're able to figure out some way to market to sort of everybody with over 40 employees, right? Or over 40-year-old employees.
Yeah, absolutely. We're focused on consultants because they can bring me 1 million lives instead of 10,000, but brokers as well. And I've already talked to 2 or 3 of the brokers. I will say that it requires the PBMs to cooperate. Once the big guys make them integrate with us, then anybody who uses that PBM will have automatic integration.
And I assume that once the system is built, which it is, there's not a lot of costs. I mean, your margins have to be pretty decent on this, right? So you can work with pretty much any size companies because it's not an issue of, software.
Correct.
Okay. Sid?
Yeah, no, you actually took one of my questions, and that was kind of financial margins. And I expect the margins to be really good. But can you talk about the revenue model? So I assume it's a PMPM plus maybe a component of shared savings with the employer.
So you know this area. Yeah, it is. It's offered on a PBM, or they can pay on a lab cost and include that as in their lab, in their standard medical claims, and then a small PBM. Because one of the other things that we do is once you have the test, let's say you take the test today and maybe you're on a couple meds, but in this real example, a member got her test back, everything was in the green, she was fine. A month later, she was diagnosed with cancer. There's only one chemo that would treat her pancreatic cancer. She typed in the first 3 letters that came up green. And she called us to say, you saved me 9 months of terror, knowing that I'm going to be in the 50% group, that this helps. Because they told her up front, it doesn't help 50% of the people. So 2 years from now, when we started, tamoxifen wasn't on the list. 3 other chemos weren't on the list as well. And, but every quarter things are added. So we went back and notified all the people that were already on, for example, tamoxifen, which is a post treatment for drug for breast cancer. It was really interesting that people-
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you please wrap up?
Sure. It was really interesting that it was, even though it was a year and a half later, it was still relevant because they're on that drug for 10 years.
Okay. All right. Next up, we have Siris Medical. Because oncology is so complex, treatments are highly patient-specific, and outcomes are heavily dependent on clinician expertise and experience. This complexity is even more challenging for healthcare payers, which have limited clinical information to judge value for treatment authorization. These challenges can cause treatment delays and subpar care. Siris Medical's AI-driven decision support software solves these challenges simultaneously by providing high-quality care insights for clinicians while automating prior authorization, leveraging a massive expert library of over 25,000 patient treatments integrated into clinical workflow. Colin Carpenter, Ph.D., President and CEO, will present. Over to you, Colin.
Good morning. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to present. My name is Colin Carpenter. I'm the founder and CEO of Siris Medical. We have a team with deep domain expertise in oncology, and I think a lot of this expertise drives our passion. I think we all know that cancer incidence is increasing. The cost is a huge cost center. And I think what people maybe don't know as much, but our experience has taught us, is that actually the care and cost are quite heterogeneous. As you might imagine, clinics that have more expertise have better outcomes. And the cost can vary quite a bit, independent of quality. So what's going on here? Really the goal of personalizing a therapy is done from scratch. So the goal of going from prescription to the delivery of treatment. And because the best treatment is unknown, the clinical team spends quite a bit of time, up to a week, balancing the right trade-offs and coming up with the best treatment for a patient. Now, the way I like to think about this is if the clinical team has a hard time deciding on best treatment, the insurance company has a heck of a time because they've never met the patient before. They don't have the clinical data, and yet they're the ones that authorize the treatment and ultimately influence the treatment the patient receives. And so this causes quite a bit of delays. Actually, this process has been shown itself to increase mortality, this prior authorization process. So just to give an example, here are patients that were treated with our software. These are patients with locally advanced lung cancer. And the clinical guidelines would basically say these patients are similar, but they really are not similar. This patient on the left has a tumor that's sitting right over the heart. So as you might imagine, the cardiac toxicity profile for the patient is completely different than the patient on the right. And these are some of the challenges. You can imagine trying to make that decision as a payer without having this detailed clinical information. So the way we solve this problem is we've created a decision support engine using AI. And this, what we do is we connect to, you can see our database has grown a bit. We connect to 30,000 expert opinions to help understand what's the best treatment for this patient. So what does this do? We see AI, and this is a problem, AI isn't good at solving every problem, but this is a problem that AI is really good at solving, being able to match a patient to a prior treatment. And we see AI as really this Rosetta Stone, providing visibility best practice. And that's important to meet the payer's need to make prior authorization decisions, and then also to meet the provider's need for expert decision-making. So what's unique about our software is that we provide value for both the payer and the provider, and then of course for the patient. So as you might imagine, if there's misalignment in what the payer and the provider perceive are the right treatment for the patient, this ends up in a phone call, fax machines, delays for the patient. Really what's happening is there's an increased operational expenditure. But at the same time, there's an increase, this mismatch creates inefficiencies in medical expenditure. So we've been able to show by using our software, the ability to recover dollars that might have gotten written off by the provider because the clinic used the therapy and the payer didn't want to pay for it, or vice versa. What we're looking to show is that this is a retrospective study we did, is that we can decrease medical expenditure for a payer by eliminating unnecessary expenditures. Now, most of our clinical evidence has been for benefit for the patient. We've shown in prospective trials that we've been able to reduce the toxicity, probability of toxicity and side effects, and get patients on treatment sooner.
Could you please go up?
Yep, this is actually a much bigger market beyond oncology. And so what we're looking to do is we're growing right now, and we're seeking payer partners to establish traction in the payer market. Thank you.
Okay. Aaron, would you like to start?
Sure. So thank you for that. How many customers or betas do you have at this time?
So we have customers, so 8 paying customers that represent about 70 to 80 cancer centers.
Okay, because I know decision support, just a way of background, I mean, I was part of a sale of a, exit for a decision support system to a West Coast entity that everybody knows. It's kind of fluxed on and up and down in terms of acquisitions, because people have done a lot of acquiring of decision support. People have different opinions about it. What are you finding to be sort of the key barriers to success in selling this product? Because there are oftentimes, in my experience, and it's probably still today, are a lot of barriers to that.
I think what is unique and what is really key to solve this problem is getting buy-in from both the payer and the provider. And so for the provider, that's getting the oncologist to use the product. And that's a barrier to competition, and it's a challenge, and it's something we've spent a number of years trying to solve. How can you integrate clinical decision support in the workflow so the doctor can get value within 10 seconds, 15 seconds?
Oftentimes we find they don't want the value, right? They're
in this case, yeah. So oncologists are a little different, I think, than other physicians. They deeply care about their patients in the outcomes. And so they really will spend extra time if they believe that there's better quality to be had.
Okay.
As you can imagine.
Not my area, but we found it to be a barrier when we were doing it. So that's why I was wondering. So Sid?
Yep, I guess, just building off on that, the 2 products that you guys have, kind of where do you see each of those products growing and where kind of the majority of the revenue is going to come from?
Yeah, I think, the provider space is without that, there really isn't the opportunity that we have. At the same time, growing in the provider space, for what was mentioned on a previous conversation, it's just not as fast as, selling to hospitals takes a while. And so we see the payer side as a way to scale this, because you can actually deploy amongst a whole set of hospitals that are within the payer's market. And so we see the payer market as a way to scale. But we do see revenue coming from both sides. So we sell our software as a subscription to hospitals. And then also we're looking to sell our software to payers in a sort of a partial savings on the operational expense or the medical expense, some sort of a shared risk model.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the point about the prior authorization, I mean, that's spot on, right? You're using fax machines today to basically verify information, right? It's a very outdated process. And so I guess, and you guys are in oncology, and so, Flatiron Health is, a very good example of one that's combined data and created their own oncology EMR. And so one of their biggest limitations was taking unstructured data and you being able to use that. And so, how is your product going to be able to do that and be able to take those different data points and give a kind of real-time prior authorization decision? Yeah,
that's what we spent a long time. I'd say, before the company even, back to when I was in academics, started on that problem of the unstructured data. I will say the data that we deal with is a lot of imaging data, and that is structured. That guides a lot of the decision making. But you're right. I mean, there's there certainly is heterogeneity in where some of the clinical data is stored. And so so we built tools for over 5 years to work on this problem. And I know I'm very familiar with this story of Flatiron. When you actually get in there and you start taking the wounds from understanding how challenging the data set is, it takes oftentimes a lot of personnel. But we really feel like we're able to ramp up a clinic in 4 or 5 weeks. So we really feel like we've been able to get over the the hurdle of onboarding clinics and the unstructured data and things like that.
How much does EHR integration? Sorry, Sid. How much does EHR integration affect your ability to sell?
It's important. It's really important because I think it's critical to fitting in the workflow. And the doctors don't want to go into a new system and log into a new system and all of that. So integration is really important. Yeah.
So does that mean you guys are going, I guess, down the health system route? If you guys are going to go sell to health systems, you're going to have to go one by one, essentially, and get them to kind of sign up for the platform. Is that the path there? Or?
Well, yeah. So that's where we see the accelerator coming in on the payer side, and that's really the side of the business that we're exploring right now. Is if we have a carrot to getting prior authorization happen sooner, and as you can imagine, this is physicians really dislike this process, and you can create a lot of if you can create an incentive there, I think you could drive sales much faster.
Yeah,
but that's right. I mean, ultimately, we will have to go provider to provider, but the acceleration from the payer, we believe, will make it much faster.
I think I have a faster route for you, Stephanie. I don't know if this is a thing, but if they have a chance to chat with me afterward, a number of these companies, I think I have some solutions for, and maybe some sales opportunities for. But yeah, no, I'm definitely well aware of what you're up to and how you're trying to do it.
That'd be great. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I appreciate that.
I'm good.
Yeah, I think I'm good as well.
Okay, fine. Well, thank you. Sorry.
Perfect time.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation, Colin, and thank you to all of our startups that presented. Evan Noch, Kwaku Owusu, Jerry Rudisin, Cathy Cather, Colin Carpenter, and thank you to our judges, Aaron Starasta and Sid Sridhar. Now the audience will get an opportunity to pick your favorite startup. Is it Destroke? we have a winner. It's Parallel Profile in Cathy Cather, CEO. Cathy, would you like to make a few remarks?
Wow, thanks. That's great. I really appreciate it. And I welcome anybody who wants to contact me at Cathy with a C at parallelprofile.com. That's Cathy at parallelprofile.com. Thanks.
Okay, great. All right, and the judges will weigh in as well, and they will pick a winner for this track, and that will be announced early next week in MedCity News. Thank you so much to our speakers and our audience. We look forward to seeing you at the next MedCity Invest Precision Medicine session.